Hi, and welcome to Live with OAIB, a conversation where we discuss critical challenges that leaders are facing today. We use our 40 plus years of experience in HR, consulting, and executive coaching to go deep on topics that are top of mind but often avoided. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Latanya Roberts, COO, executive coach, and human capital strategist. I'm a true integrator who takes a holistic approach to turn your vision for the organization or yourself into solutions that create inclusive cultures where all not only feel but know they can thrive. My superpower has been my ability to help my clients articulate their needs and goals and then break them down into actionable steps that don't overwhelm them. I'm joined by Tawana.
Good afternoon. My name is Tawana Bagwad. I am the CEO and principal consultant for OAIB. I am a visionary who believes in the power and promise of equity, and I help organizations become places where everyone has a deep sense of belonging. I cut through the background noise and coach individuals and groups, but especially leaders, to make a mindset shift, starting with them being their authentic selves, aligning with their purpose, and being rooted in their own personal power. I would say my superpower is helping people become aware of their blind spots so they can put the oxygen mask on themselves and then make others feel safe, heard, and inspired. So happy to be here with you all. Looking forward to this conversation today.
All right. So our tagline at OAIB is leveraging the power and promise of equity. So we're going to talk about what that really means today. And as we're going through this, we have about an hour's time. Go ahead and put any questions or comments in the chat box. We'll be sure to answer them throughout the conversation. We'd love to hear from you and love to bring you into our topics. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, Tawana, really, in your words, what does it mean to leverage the power and promise of equity?
Yeah, this tagline really resonates with my spirit. So, for me, I would say it means you understand that your organization is comprised of individuals that are different. So, you should embrace those differences by cultivating the talent and creating an environment that is conducive for all to thrive, not just strive.
Mhm.
This is a true investment with a huge rate of return. That's why I say the power. It's about unleashing the full potential of all people. You meet them where they are and elevate them so that people feel safe to bring their authentic selves to work every single day. They are more creative, innovative, productive. And the why is because they become inspired, committed, loyal, and passionate about what they do and how they do it. Who wouldn't want that? So, this is from an unknown author. I love this quote. It says, equity is giving everyone the same pair of shoes, but I'm sorry, equality is giving everyone the same pair of shoes, and equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits. So when you think about that, today everyone wants to be show up as being fair. I've done the same thing for everyone, so no one can say that I am. And you get to fill in the blank. But really, you got to get to know your people and understand what they need so that they can be inspired and committed and loyal and passionate about what they do for you. The flip side to this is you're trying to assimilate your employees to be in this defined box. And when we see that occurs, we know that there's an inequity because the dominant culture will tend to be the model that they want people to fall into. And therefore, people will shrink. They'll play small, right? They will adjust to try to fit in. So you never really get their full potential of their creativity, of their innovation, of what else they can bring to the table because they're bringing their lived experiences and culture with them. And that's why I love doing the distinction between equity and equality.
Absolutely. When we're coaching, a lot of times we're talking to people about their default self, right? That little space that they go to, that's kind of their safe space. They don't have to really think about it. And we say usually they're operating from four places, right? So fear, blame, shame, doubt. Um, yeah, fear,
Yeah.
blame, shame, and doubt. Make sure I had all four.
Yeah.
Why do you think people fear equity in the workplace? Where do you think that's coming from?
So this one is interesting, right? Because I alluded to it in my opening, which is that give everyone the same thing, even if they may need more, or in some cases less. It takes away the excuse that I gave everyone the same thing, right? So I'm fair. I'm showing up as equitable.
Right.
But this to me gets at how we dehumanize individuals and we limit their potential. And I believe that most leaders, and this isn't intended to be offensive at all, but leadership today requires more.
Yes, it does.
And so sometimes to not have equity in your organization is a scapegoat, right? It's lazy leadership, in my opinion.
Mhm. Mhm.
Lazy leadership because it doesn't require you to get to know your people, to understand their needs.
Mhm.
And that is so critical when you're talking about leading an organization to bring out the best in everyone because you benefit from their skills, gifts, and talents. So I believe they fear equity is because it requires more. At
Mhm.
least that's the myth or the excuse that's being used. And I think they shortchange themselves on reaping the benefits of
Mhm.
if I knew my employees understood what motivate and inspired them, and I'm able to provide an environment where they can be psychologically safe to bring their authentic and whole self to work. The
Mhm.
company, the organization benefits from that experience because they're all in.
Absolutely. So lazy leadership or not being able to adapt your style is we hear this all the time, right? People get comfortable, they've been doing something that has worked for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And one thing that we are really leaning on lately is this concept of situational leadership, right?
Absolutely.
Because to your point, there is no one size fits all approach. So what do you do? And also recognizing your own personal blind spots and how you need to adapt to a person's style, practicing that platinum rule, not the golden rule, and change up your leadership approach. And are you able to do that? Putting ego aside, getting outside of your comfort zone and trying something new. So, along those lines, the concept of equity versus equality can be a little fuzzy for some people.
Absolutely.
So, what are some examples in your mind of leading from a place of equity versus leading from a place of equality and vice versa?
Yeah, let me do that by I'll share a little story. So, most companies have an education reimbursement policy where all employees have access to, let's say, a maximum amount of $5,500, right, to get a certificate. But they find that the certificate program may be 7,500, which means that you need to pay the balance out of pocket to get this certification. I would tell you that that's normal, right? But that's also equity, meaning I've given everyone access to $5,500 to get a certificate or get a certification, right?
Or that's
Great.
equality,
I'm sorry, that's equality. See, I
mhm.
love this equity thing.
Right? Even we get it.
Equity, equality, right? So
Love it.
that's equality. I've given everyone access to 5,500. Great. But if you look at it from an equity lens, the reality is there are some staff members that don't have funds or spare dollars to be able to pay this balance. So, through an interview process, for example, your manager may learn that you don't have the spare dollars, but they want to support you to get this certification. So, then there's things that the organization can do. This is about meeting the person where they are, giving them access, right? And also opportunity, and not having them to be limited because they may not have the additional funds. There could be things like scholarship that will close that gap for them. They could take out a personal loan from the company and then do small installments of maybe $50 per paycheck, right? They could also have sponsorship that may come out a different fund so that this person does not miss an opportunity to get a certification that the company ultimately benefits from, because that's an investment into an employee that now on that return we have an upskilled an employee. For example, we now can stretch them into a different role because they're bringing an additional skill set that they didn't have before, or they're able to share more knowledge with their teammates that could help their impact on whatever project they're working on be that much more better than if they had not obtained the certification or new skills. That is equity at its best.
I love that. There's so many options, and I think we are so quick to hit that easy button and just discount a person in that situation. But there's so many different ways to create equity and be an advocate for yourself, but then also be an advocate for another. Another example that I can think of here would be just borrowing from your own IRA. That's your money, and then paying it back too. So again, that's another option if you're in that position where you're not able to fill in that financial gap, but you still don't want to remove yourself from an opportunity. And I will say for the managers, it's about creating that psychologically safe space and creating that relationship so that person feels comfortable saying, "Hey, I want to participate. Here's my barrier. Here's what help looks like for me." And then manager or leader, you rise to the occasion and co-create a solution that works for both. And at the end of the day, you all benefit from it.
I think something that's also important that you're going to hear me reference quite a bit in this conversation is really about leading with humanity.
Hmm.
Like, what does that absolutely means for you as a leader? How does that show up? How does that look? And the foundation is getting to know your people.
Hmm.
Right? That's at the foundation. Understanding, as I said before, what inspires and motivate them. And you'll find that people don't need a lot. But what is important is to be seen, heard, and felt. And how do you do that? It's making connections. It's not having people to feel that they're a number or just a member and that they need to fit in, right? Versus valuing the diversity that they bring and then leveraging that in a way that it benefits from everyone.
Absolutely. So when you think about differences you see when equity is a lens to which an organization approach things, what does that look like? What's the difference?
So I have to start out by saying I have a very strong belief, right? And I've always felt this way,
Mhm.
is that it's super important for us to understand that if we solve for the minority culture, then everyone benefits. So I just need to say that out loud, right? When we solve for the downtrodden, everyone benefits. When we solve for the least of them, everyone benefits. So that is my approach when I'm doing this work. So I would say to you that there are situations and scenarios that we need to go in with an equity lens that will take into account the least of. So when I'm doing that, I look at the policies, the practices, the procedures, the systems, and I look at who's responsible for delivering those policies, practices, and procedures. And that's where you start to get at where are there exclusionary behaviors, because systemic racism is real. Whether the individual has very good intentions that is delivering against these policy practices and procedures, that's great. But you can have language that will lean to exclude. And because you've done it the same way over and over again, and there's policies and practices that were put in place before you even got to the organization, it is just the way we do things. So we have to do some re examining of how we recruit, of how we manage our talent, of how we evaluate performance, of how we promote. And we got to go back to those fundamental organizational approaches, practices, procedures, and look at if there is things in those systems or practices that will have you to be exclusionary. And then how do we go about uprooting, changing? And then more importantly, there's some detoxing we have to do, because there's people that's been doing it this way for many years and don't have an alternative or another way. So now we got to train on top of that. And we, for definitely in the training, have to look at biases. What create biases? When we use the word blind spots, is a blind spot because we don't know. So we have to expose those things. So we got to work on the systems, the processes, the procedures, but we also have to look at those people that are the gatekeepers of those things.
Absolutely. Turn yourself inwards before you can fix outward for sure. And in doing that, and speaking of leading with humanity, it's giving the grace to know that people are going to make mistakes. And as you're going through this transformation, this new mindset, this behavior change, you're going to make mistakes as well. So, what mistakes have you seen organizations make when they try to evolve from equality to equity?
So the first thing is we start out by making it a checkbox. Okay, we're going to be more equitable, right? And they go, so we changed this process, we changed this practice, but sometimes we don't go the full extent, right? We go halfway in, because like I said, if we're not looking at the people who are the gatekeeper of those things, then we haven't gone far enough. If we don't understand the people that are in our organization, if we're not truly valuing their differences, then we misstep along the way. Now, I recognize that this is a journey, right? We can't change all the policies and practices overnight. And that is not what I'm suggesting. But I will tell you, we have to first get alignment at the top. And I will also tell you that that alignment sometimes do not permeate through the organization. So the leaders go, yes, we got it, we're ready, let's go. But there's not alignment that's happening at that next level, where those are the managers and leaders that are managing the bulk of the people. So there's a misalignment from leadership to the next level of line leaders. Mistake number one.
Absolutely, that misalignment creates a lot of challenges. You know, if the leaders are on board and they're fighting their own battles, right, with how do I adopt these new behaviors, it doesn't funnel down to the next level, which in turn it doesn't funnel down all the way to the lowest level. So there's a lot of confusion, right, which creates some additional challenges. Who would you say is responsible for making an organization equitable?
Everyone's responsible. I wholeheartedly believe that is the answer. However, decision makers are the ones who ignite this process. Decision makers should be the one that are holding those accountable, right? Those that are responsible for ensuring that the lived experience, and particularly for people of color, is balanced. And that doesn't happen regularly. Those that are having lived experience that does not align with what they're hearing their leaders say need to speak up. So they play a role as well. Most times, people of color don't speak up because they are concerned with retaliation, losing their job. They're the breadwinners, they are the only. And so they accept bad behavior, right? They accept unwanted behaviors that will have their lived experience to be sometimes discriminatory. And they're working in an environment that is unhealthy, that has fear built into it. When those things occurs, there is a gap between what should be occurring and what is occurring. And if those that are at the top aren't checking, and those that are at the bottom are not signaling or communicating that bad things are happening, then that perpetuates the negativity that goes on for years and years until. And the until looks like an uprising. The until looks like people getting terminated. The until looks like people quitting. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. And let's not even talk about the quiet quitting, where folks can't take it anymore or refuse to take it. So you have these things occurring. In worst case scenarios, are we're seeing more and more lawsuits that are coming out now of mistreatment. So when I say everyone plays a role, leaders are responsible for checking to make sure that their commitment is being delivered, and an active leadership role, and that everyone is being held accountable. And those that are experiencing unwanted behaviors, you're responsible for speaking up and out.
Absolutely. And I love that you talk about the top down but the bottom up approach to it, because it does take everyone. Someone has to call out or call in when they see mistreatment instead of being a bystander and just watching it go by. What advice would you have for someone who has been mistreated or seen some disparities in the workplace, but they are fearful of calling that person in or confronting that person on their own? So how do they confront someone who's in a position of influence, right? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that they are in a leadership position. They could be their peer as well. How do you talk to that person who needs to call someone in on a situation and make change and hold them accountable?
I love that question. It's something that's being lived every single day. And it is the thing that I would say get in the way of that bottom up voice. So there's a couple of things that I would suggest. If the company has a hotline and you don't feel that you uh, are safe enough to report or to go directly to that person, this is a way to do that. I would also encourage you to find out who's your allies, get some coaching, maybe go through your affinity group. Um, if you still feel that that's not safe for you, then it's important for you to inform HR or your manager so that you can gain support in addressing a peer or someone that's over you. But to be quiet is no longer okay, because the actions will continue. And unfortunately, they'll get worse. Unfortunately, they will get worse. And it could be because it's been acceptable behavior. So the person don't know that that's wrong. Or you may have laughed it off, or other peers around you may have done the same. So they're like, oh, that's kind of a going joke. That's, if they had a problem with that, they wouldn't laugh. But that is a defense or coping mechanism that we typically use. So I would encourage you to speak to your manager, seek out allies, speak in your affinity group, call a hotline if the organization have that. Use HR as a mediator to get support. So there's lots of ways, but what I would not encourage is to not say anything.
1000% agree. And another strategy that I've seen work really well is if even if you feel like you can't go to HR or you can't go to your manager, because in reality, sometimes we just can't. It's finding someone who is at the same level or is respected by that person who is the offender, developing that relationship with them and having them have the conversation. So again, it's relationship building, it's getting to know people, and it's really understanding uh, how you can find allyship or be an ally to someone else as well, and not letting these behaviors that have been accepted or normalized continue to go on, because then we cannot change the culture,
That's right.
right? And so thinking about this culture change, it's not an overnight activity,
That's
right?
right.
It's identifying what the problem is, identifying what the solutions can be, creating a strategy to help you go from here to there, identifying who are your change champions. It's so closely related to change management, right? So who are the people that are those outliers that you know are going to be resistant, but who are those people that you know have influence and are early adopters, right? And a lot of times we start with the leadership, getting them on the same page to make sure that they're on board with, well, what is the vision? What's the direction that we're headed in, right? And what's the language? And then that funnels down to the rest of the organization. So how can leaders get their company on board with creating and maintaining an equitable workplace and truly working on transforming the culture of the organization?
So great question. This one, I would tell you, we as an organization are in the throes of right now, right? So when we talk about how do you get a company on board with creating and maintaining an equitable workplace, I would say there's no silver bullet to this because it truly boils down to where is the organization in their journey, and it's a full spectrum of that. So there needs to be some assessing. We need to baseline. Where are you today? Understanding the current reality of your culture is truly important before you just leap out there. And leaders play a critical role in having those honest conversations. And most times it would take a third party to take them through that process because they would, you know, as leaders do, work their way through justifying the why, right? So that would be the first thing, assess for the reality check. I think then after understanding your current reality and the culture that has been created as a result of that, to begin to look at who are the people in the organization that exhibit behavior that is perpetuating the current reality that you don't want to have. And having some honest conversations with those leaders around here's the shift that we're looking to make. We would love to have you be a part of that shift because they need to come on board with that journey and play an active role, or they would show up as resisting and undermining the work that's happening. Then, thirdly, I would say HR plays such a critical role when it comes to the policies, practices, and procedures. And I can also tell you that there sometimes is a gap with HR understanding around what it takes to change these policies, practices, and procedures with an equity lens because they don't have it themselves. And that's not a dig on HR, right? I'm an HR professional. I love this area, this arena. I think it's a special group of people to be able to do this work where you put people first. But also, we need to recognize that some of the HR departments need support and help. And what does that look like? Then I would say we start to bring in the organization because we've done the assessment, because we've looked at our current reality, because we've onboarded leaders who have been the champions of the old reality, and that they need to be introduced first to the new reality and direction that we're leading to. And then they need to be trained. And that training needs to trickle down to the rest of the organization, but also making it palatable for people to understand what really is diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does it really look like to have a sense of belonging, a culture of belonging for all? And today that has not been defined.
You spoke of the shift, right? And not everyone being basically equipped to lead from a lens of equity or lead from a lens of DEI. Why do you think it's so hard, particularly for leaders to do it, to adopt an equity-based lens?
Good question. I would say most times they don't know what they don't know. That makes it hard. I would tell you change is hard. And to be quite honest, scary. And we have the stigma of leaders should know. You are deemed a leader, therefore you're supposed to have all the answers and know how to go, where to go, when to go. And most leaders are identify themselves as leaders and believe that to be the case. So they're not going to do things that will expose them to some vulnerability that say they don't know the way. So I would tell you, and one could say that's ego, if we really call it what it is, right? And that's okay too, right? Because again, it's a journey. But saying I don't know and being okay with that, and then surrounding yourself with people who do, who have an expertise or a better understanding, is the ultimate leader, in my opinion. That's leadership at its best. But I would say those are the reasons why they fear from lack of unknown, um, and they're not willing to be exposed.
I think it's I mentioned the four places that we tend to operate from
Right.
earlier: the fear, the blame, the shout, and and doubt. All of that's wrapped up in there, right? It's
Absolutely.
the fear of the unknown, the blame if you were found out or you were exposed. It's the doubt of not being able to get it right and the shame that's surrounded by it, right? So it's so complicated when we our heart may be in the right place, our head is wrapped up in confusion, but our hand still has to follow and still be able to lead that organization, lead the people. So there's a lot of literature that's out there lately, and especially in the last 3 years or so, right? And we have this so-called woke culture. Everyone thinks that they know what's going on. Well, not everyone, but some people think they know what's going on. So a lot of times we come into organizations and we're doing DEI strategy or training or coaching, and we always get that one person that stands out and says, "Oh, I know all the things. Here's the background. It's
Mhm.
white supremacy and blah 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 blah." We hear that all the time, right? So, what message do you have for those leaders that see themselves as very progressive and or allies, but lead from a perspective of equality versus equity, and still kind of straddle the fence there?
Great questions. First, I say thank you for doing some work because there is a lot of people who haven't, right? Secondly, um, as a practitioner, we're constantly doing work. There is something new happening every single day in this space. So I would say gird up your loins because to say that you know just when you think you know something else will happen or something new comes out that will have you to be a student of this work. I would also say, as I think about those that we have encountered that consider themselves to be woke and aware, is that you should remain a student, which will keep you humble in this space because there's so many nuances, and I like to call it layers to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those layers look like leadership style, environment, culture, history, the amount of intersectionality that you have in your organization and individuals sitting that have been suppressed or oppressed and have another what's the word I'm looking for, another view on this world and how they believe they should be treated. And you're trying to take all of that into account so that you do show up fair and equitable to all. And just when you think you got it figured out, something else happened. So I would encourage them to continue to study, to be open minded, but more importantly, always wear their hat of humanity.
Absolutely. So we've spent a lot of time talking about leadership's role, a little bit about the rest of the organization, but we know that a lot of times this need, this burning desire to change the culture starts at the team level, right? And so not everyone is going to be in executive positions. Not everyone is in that position of leadership or management. What would you say to the person who's not in that role? How can they pitch a need for the organization to move towards equity to their leadership, to the decision makers?
Great question. I have two thoughts that have come to mind when you said that. The first is around it is super important to speak truth to power. And you have to share your lived experience in and out of work because we tend to compartmentalize who shows up for work and who's, after five, if you will. And so, as we do that, it is important for the leaders to know that I would love to bring my whole self to work, but that is not acceptable in this current culture. If you would consider my lived experience as just an example of maybe what others are experiencing in the organization, I'm hoping that that would appeal to you in a way that will have you to consider what we could do differently if we could reimagine together everyone bringing their whole self to work and join a committee or start one so that you can partner with your leaders on what that future culture could look like. Because again, they don't know what they don't know. And I will often say to people, who have you told this to? Who knows about this? And most time the answer is, I've told no one. I'm suffering in silence. And then I would ask, if your leaders knew this was your lived experience, do you believe that they would support you to try to create a better environment? And I would tell you, most times we get a yes. That's encouraging, right? Because then I feel more empowered to go share because of what I know about the leaders. And then there's some of giving the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to share. Let's see what come out of that. And go with solutions. I want to start at ERG. I think we should start a DEIB work group. I think we should hire external support. Right? There's many ways in which you can get at this to, I believe, encourage your leadership and then offer solutions to help them to get started on an equity journey. And I believe that then opens up the door for how we begin to change policies, practices, procedures. because we began to start exposing it from impact first. My lived experience is an impact. There's others in the organization that have a lived experience. That's impact. So we got to put the human back into this equation. And that's the authentic one, not the assimilated one.
I love that. And it just reminds me of we're taught to, if you have a problem, bring a solution, but it's also participating in your own rescue.
Absolutely.
Right? It's as you say, putting your oxygen mask on
Yeah.
first. So this is what help looks like for me. And oh, by the way, I'm not the only one that
Right.
experiences this. Right? So how can we create this community, this environment where we can have advocacy, we can have sponsorship, and really truly create a new culture where everyone can thrive? That's how you get to equity in the workplace. Now, even after all of this, there are still going to be some people that still lead from this equality mindset. And they'll say, hey, there's people in this world who say that, anyone can go out there and have the same opportunities if they just work hard and they just truly do not get the concept of equity. What do you say to those people?
I would tell them that equality is going to take you but so far. I would tell them that today you have some resemblance of what equality is, but to be quite honest, we're not even at equality. Because if we were, then we would not see the things that we see in organizations, like microaggressions happening every single day. We would not see pay disparities. We would not see gender inequities. So you could say that your organization is living equality right now, and I would challenge you on that. So to shift from equality to equity would require you to do some work around baseline, is what I'm calling equality, and then understand the gap between your current reality of then meeting equality before you begin to move to equity, which will look like equality is giving everyone the same thing. Equity looks like giving individuals what they need to thrive versus strive. That in and of itself is a huge jump. And today, we are not even at equality.
Agreed, agreed. So now you're telling them do this baseline assessment so we can just get to equality
Yeah,
and then figure out how do we get fill in that gap to get to equity.
that's
And
right.
let's talk about how you measure it.
Sure.
What are a couple of ways that an organization can measure equity in the workplace and really track their progress? Just a couple. Don't give away all the secret sauce, but just a couple.
Right. I love that. I mean, it's a great question. And I would tell you there's tangibles and intangibles, right? So the first thing I would be looking at is the culture. And you and I know that's foundational, right? And I would be looking to see how healthy is your culture. That culture is something that is defined whether you work on it or not. So if we start there with measuring culture, you can look at the level of engagement. We can look at some demographic numbers, okay? And we can look at who's at the top and who's at the bottom. We can look at the ethnicity in your organization. We can look at unwanted behaviors that you have gotten complaints about as we talk about people lived experiences in your organization. We can look at your attrition rate and categorize those by women, by gender, by sexual orientation, by race. We can look at, we can slice and dice that in so many ways. Also, what's important is I go back to engagement. There are elements of engagement where you look at how are people responding to the shifts that are occurring in the organization. You could do that by survey. You could do that by focus groups. You could do that by listening sessions, right? So there's many ways in which we can get at measuring. But I always just go look at the handbook, for example. Now, I'm professionally trained, so what may seem normal to the average eye, we can quickly tell if there's, structural racism already built into your policy. We can look at exit interviews and understand why people have left to get at some of the underpinning, issues that our organization have, which will then have us to customize measures to ensure that we don't have these things occurring anymore. So there's lots of measures that we can use or create in order to understand if we are truly operating at a equitable level.
I said a couple and you
I'm
just leaped
sorry.
in. You
I
just can't help yourself. It's okay. It's okay. That
like
just it's the passion oozing out of
right.
you. I get it. You dropped so many gems today, as always. Such a good conversation, and I'm so glad we had a chance to really talk about what does it mean to leverage the power and promise of equity, because it can be confusing to some people. Like look at it and like, well, what does that mean? So
Mhm.
just give me a few more reasons of how OAIB can help their customers, potential customers, leverage the promise and power of equity.
So today, because this is also evolving as we continue to do work with our clients, and it also shows up differently when we're around the globe. But I would tell you, we come in and we do exactly what I said. We assess, right? We don't come in with someone have already diagnosed what the issue is. We appreciate that there's been some pre-work, but we come in and we assess. We do a discovery. We emerge ourselves into your organization so that we can truly understand some of those pain points, right? From there, we began to have conversations with gatekeepers, leaders, at every level in the organization. We give voice to the voiceless. We have focus groups. We have listening sessions where we're really trying to get at those pain points in a way that it's unfiltered. Then from there, we start to look at strategizing around what does it take to have this organization to be the best version of themselves based on the feedback that we've heard. And I should mention that we also interview. We love interviews. Oh my goodness, the interviews are so impactful and they really shed light on the current reality of the organization. And then we go back to the leaders and we have real candid, unfiltered conversations about where they are. And I would tell you, most times the leaders are open, but they don't feel good about what the report backs say. And that's okay because we're not there to judge. We speak on the reality, their current reality. We talk about what their future could potentially look like. We gain alignment. And then we begin to put a roadmap in place to help them close the gap from their current to what they want their future to be. And we do that in ways that meet the organization where they are. So we don't cookie cut, we customize per client where they are. And we go from there and we support them not only from the vision to the execution or implementation. which looks like training and coaching and updating handbooks and the list goes on for our capability, our expertise, and what we understand our client to need. And that, I would say, has been our organization's superpower.
Oh, absolutely. And just being able to have those candid conversations and challenge people to step outside their comfort zone, challenge their
Absolutely.
blind spots, and we're very honest. It's if you're looking for someone that's just going to tell you what you want to hear, don't hire us.
Absolutely.
We're not about transactional change, it's transformation. And to be transformative, you have to get deep, heavy, and messy. You got to root out the ugly and
Yeah.
turn it around. Right. So that is definitely one of those things about if you want to be an organization at your best, you have to go there. And we certainly do. All right, Tawana, as always, it has been so great chatting with you. Thank you all that joined us online, left comments. We really appreciate those. For those that are listening to the replay, please, if you have any other questions, go ahead and write those down below and we'll respond to them. And we look forward to seeing you during our next one. If you're interested in any of our services at Organization at its Best, please visit our website at www.oaib.org. Again, that's oaib.org. I'm Latanya. That's Tawana. It was so great chatting with you all. We'll see you next time.
Yay. Thank you for joining us.